Hello, BookTube. Do you have your trench coat on? Do you have your maul by your side? have you got a ringside seat because you're back into the Thunderdome of the Has Steve Read It tag? This was created by Matthew at Mayberry Books with a simple idea in mind. Look at the books in your collection. Don't go out of your way. Don't pick something in a box in the basement. Don't pick something in lower Turkmenistani. Pick the books on your shelves and think, has Steve read these books? Has he read everything that I own? Or can I pick some books that he hasn't read? And Matthew scored 2. He listed a bunch of books and he scored 2 that I hadn't read. And he made his video into a tag and it went viral. Apparently a whole bunch of you want to know, has Steve read every book in my collection? Can I pick some that he hasn't read? And even if he has read them all, what does he think about them? What are his opinions on them all? And this has turned out to be so much fun for a number of different reasons. One, it's fun to poke the bear. I perfectly admit that. I read a lot. I read an enormous amount, and I have for a very long time. So it's a good mountain to sort of throw your piton against. And two, everybody has understood so far, just instinctively, in this little corner of BookTube that we have, these 100 or so channels, everybody has understood that this is all in fun. There's nothing on the line here. We can rib each other all day long about what we have and haven't read. It's not a mark of how good a reader you are or how bad a reader you are. It's not a mark of how timid or adventurous a reader you are. It's not a mark of anything. It's just fun. And also, 3, and maybe most important of all, it's getting a whole bunch of fascinating books talked about. Books that BookTube usually doesn't talk about. And I think that's just fascinating. And I sort of belatedly, I didn't do it for Matthew, although I'm going to make a video response for Matthew. But I've sort of added to the crackpot fervor of this whole thing by deciding to make a video response to every one of these videos. It's just so much fun. And in a way, I don't know if this is true or if this is just me being delusional, but in a way, I'm interpreting it anyway as a sign of affection, that maybe some of you are okay with me continuing to stick around this corner of BookTube. So many people have been trying their hand at doing this tag. Many people have been coming out with 8, 10, 6 books to see, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure that he's read this. And we've been going through them one by one. We haven't done Matthew yet, but we've been going through all the others. I've been making videos of every one of them. And although it's in fun, it's also a ruthless contest. Some people have been noticing. Who's scoring the highest? Matthew scored 2. A couple of other people scored 2. Peg at the history shelf scored 1. And is our biggest loser because of that. And Hannah at Hannah's Books scored 4, including a book she co-wrote herself. It was totally fair. It's not she co-wrote it and had 100 copies printed and I didn't know about it. No, it was a legitimate publisher. It's just I had never done it, never read it, never got it. She scored 4 that I have not read, and that is so far the highest score. So she has been on her throne this whole time. Now we're going to see if she can be dethroned, because today's contestant stepping into the ring is Alan Braswell. And a lot of you are going to know that name because he was for a long time a prolific commentator, a wonderful commentator, comment leaver on BookTube channels. If you have a BookTube channel, then you know what I know quite well, which is that there are plenty of people who leave comments who don't have BookTube channels. And some of them leave comments regularly. They keep up a regular dialogue. And then there's my channel, where in addition to those people, I also have a large amount of lurkers. In YouTube terminology, a lurker is someone who never misses a video of yours, but never makes their presence known, never leaves a comment of any kind. And as if having lurkers on a channel of a prima donna like me who needs self-validation at every turn wasn't bad enough, often when I mention that I have lurkers, my own lurkers, the lurkers on this channel, will go the extra mile of maddening by leaving comments in the video saying, "Hi, I'm a lurker, going back to lurking now." That's not how it works. You're not supposed to tell me that you're a lurker and then go back to lurking. What's wrong with you people? But Alan Braswell has not been a lurker. He has been he's an active participant in the BookTube channels that he watches, and he recently took the advice that all BookTubers would give you, which is start your own BookTube channel. Try it yourself. Just figure out how to work the camera on your phone, get a tripod or set it up against a book, experiment with the lighting so that the camera has plenty of light to work off to make you nice and sharp. Experiment with the background so that it's not distracting or boring or blank or weird. And then just make a video. You don't have to upload it if you don't like it, and you don't have to keep uploading if it becomes more work or if you don't like the long-term effect. But try it. Just try it. You don't have to be the most well-read person in the world. You don't have to be the most interesting reader in the world. We're not interested in any of that. We put up with Jason Harrigan, for God's sake. we want to hear about you and your reading. That's all. Try it. Alan Braswell did try it, and he now has a video channel, and it has some videos on it. And I hate to say it, but I was late learning that he had a channel. I think he might have told me, and it just didn't register with me. And finally, I realized that he did, and he made the Alan Braswell edition of the Has Steve Read It tag. So how will he do against all of the competition and against the reigning queen of the universe? Let's find out. His first book is Colossus by Niall Ferguson. Niall Ferguson's gigantic pile of wet wash from 2004. And this is a yes for me. 2004, I was well back in the game of reading and reviewing new releases. And Colossus may have been the first Niall Ferguson book where the scales dropped completely from my eyes, and any momentum that I had about him from earlier books finally fell away, and I realized that he's just entirely full of sheep dip. Colossus may have been the book that did that. All about the American Empire and the rise and fall of the American Empire, written as a superstar Harvard teacher, specifically pitched at know-nothing 18-year-old glue-sniffing undergraduates, for all the world completely ignorant of the fact that he would have other people reading his books, that his books would be read by people who weren't glue-sniffing, vacant-eyed undergraduates, who maybe know as much or more about history than he does. Colossus is a yes. I read it because it was the new Niall Ferguson, and by 2004 I was reading all the major new releases, just as I am now. I do not recommend it. I have read it, but it is a total waste of your time. It is an idiotic book. Then we move on to the next one. The next one, I have a feeling that Alan Braswell picked it specifically because he was aiming to poke the bear. It's by Bruce Perry, and the title is The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. It's a yes. Of course, I read it with a title like that. It's a collection of the author's psychological profiles of the warped and damaged people that he has met in his professional capacity. And of course, I felt a little sting of outrage once I realized that that's what the book was. Once I was reading other portraits in the book, when I realized that, because I myself, a long time ago, was raised and socialized by dogs, not by humans. And I'm not a warped and twisted psychological portrait. Not a word. Anybody you hear from the little farmhouse in Vermont who is currently screaming at the TV, no, that's not true, he is, just ignore them. They're crazy up in Vermont. No, I was raised and socialized by dogs. It doesn't necessarily make you crazy. It doesn't necessarily make you damaged. Dogs are actually wonderful people. I wouldn't have suffered either if I'd been raised and socialized by pigs. Pigs are also wonderful, wonderful people. I might have been a little bit on the twitchy side if I'd been raised and socialized by raccoons. They also are wonderful people, but they're much, much smarter than almost any other animal. So then with the attendant neuroses. But nevertheless. Anyway, that is a yes. The next book is also a yes, and oh my God, if I thought the first book was a caution, the next book is just a monument of damning irony. It's Diplomacy by Henry Kissinger. It's his big book, has the Congress of Vienna on the cover. It's all about Bismarck and Talleyrand and all these people, and it was written, by assistants and by tamed and cowering and totally anonymous academics working for a paycheck out of an institution soaked in blood money. Kissinger signed his name to it, and it's about the birth of relatively modern, in the last 2 centuries, diplomacy and realpolitik, written by someone who, when he was involved in diplomacy, if you want to call it that, was nothing but a failure. His entire record is one long train wreck of unmitigated and blood-soaked failure. And here he is writing the book on diplomacy. It reminded me when it first came out. That's when I read it. I read it in white hot rage when it first came out, and I've since reread it. I read it as a paperback only about 10 years ago, and the rage was not diminished. This is a horrible monster on the world stage who has just lived long enough to launder that tradition by waiting out the memories of it. Richard Nixon was doing the same thing at the end of his life, writing big, bloated, statesman-like memoirs, gigantic books of political analysis and whatnot, as if the world was supposed to forget the monster that he was. And Kissinger's been doing that for literally twice as long. So diplomacy is a yes, but I vociferously do not recommend it. And the next one is a yes. This is As God Commands by Niccolo Ammanti. He's a superstar young writer in Italy, and this is translated, and I read the translation by Jonathan Hunt. And it's the story of a totally inept gang of would-be criminals in Italy. This is a totally funny. It's sort of like a very high-stakes and gritty and Italian version of the gang that couldn't shoot straight. They're trying to knock off an ATM. They're figuring there are these boxes that are full of money. So what's the harm? It's an easy thing to do. Only it's not easy. It's every aspect of what they try, from the planning all the way to the execution and the aftermath, are dogged by hilarious and perverse and sometimes violent side effects and things going wrong. I really enjoyed the book, and that was even in English translation. And when I read it, I think it came out, I don't remember when it came out, but when I read the English language translation that I got as a matter of course, just by being a reviewer, I made a mental note to try and find the original, to order the original on Amazon Italy and see if, if the translation was really that good, or the book is even better, who knows. But I never did it. I never actually did it. So this is a book, I have read it, but I have only read it in English. That feels like a lessening, because I try not to do that, especially if a book really pleases me. Then I will hunt out the original. The next one is a work of Gilded Age history, which makes it kind of strange. It's kind of strange that it's on here. In every one of these videos, every one of these Has Steve read it videos, there's always at least one book where I look at it and think, okay, well, the rest of these maybe I can understand, but what on earth was the person thinking, putting this on a list of books that he thinks I might not have read? What on earth? I have to admit, Alan Braswell's list has a few of those. The idea that I would not have read Henry Kissinger's book Diplomacy is a little far-fetched. The idea that I wouldn't have read Colossus when it's by a big deal, reviewed everywhere, modern popular historian during the time when I am a professional book critic. But this next one is squarely in my wheelhouse. It's called The King of the Lobby by Kathryn Jacob, and it's about Sam Ward, who was, for a half a generation, he was a gigantic political poobah in Washington at pretty much exactly the era that I love to read about, right on the doorstep of the era that I love to read about. Sam Ward cast a long shadow on the era that I do like to read about, the era where I have read every book and where I know everything there is to know about it, the beginnings of the so-called progressive era. He was right on the doorstep of that and cast a long shadow into it. So, of course, I've read it. Of course, I've read this book. You don't get many books on this subject that have come out in relatively modern times. Now, most of you will never have heard of Sam Ward. The closest you might have come is that you might have heard of his sister, Julia Ward Howe, who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. But he was a fascinating character in his own right. I think a psychopath, but one way or another, a benign one. And yes, this is a yes. I have read this book. I didn't like it. I thought it was pretty thin, but I did read it. Then the next one is science fiction, and it's classic old-style metal spinner rack at the drugstore science fiction. So it's another one that verges very closely into what was he thinking territory. This is The Last Hurrah of the Golden Horde by Norman Spinrad, which I didn't recognize the cover that Alan Braswell showed on his video, but once upon a time it was a battered old mass-market paperback with a standard pulpy cover of a big needle-shaped spaceship on a launch pad and a bunch of people heading to it to launch off. Nothing to do with the book, but I read that old paperback. I think it was around $2, something like that. All mass market paperback science fictions were, and like some other readers of a certain vintage, I hoovered up everything like that, all of it that I could find. I was never a big fan of Norman Spinrad. I'm still not. I don't like him. I don't particularly like his science fiction novels, even with the rest of the Silver Age science fiction authors like him and those old great mass markets, even with a lot of those older titles goldening in my mind through nostalgia, he's not one of the authors that does that. I don't particularly like him, but I still read everything he wrote. So this is a yes. And then the next one is The Life of General Jackson by Robert Louis Dabney. Dabney was a nut job Southern preacher man, and he wrote a biography of Stonewall Jackson in 1866, when both Jackson's corpse and the Confederacy were still warm. And of course, because it was written in 1866, and because it was written in the full flower of the idea that there was some sort of nobility in the Confederacy, I imagine that this book is full of pieties of one kind or another about what a genius Jackson was. He wasn't. About what a brilliant statesman he was, about what a loyal patriot he was. He wasn't any of those things. He was a spittle-drooling, partially amnesiac, psychopathic moron. He was one of the foremost generals of the Confederacy, and was therefore a traitor to his country, exceeded in his treachery by his boss, Robert E. Lee, the greatest traitor in the history of the country, but not exceeded by much, and also a horrific train wreck of a general, someone who considered 25% losses to be okay for a simple marching attrition. That is bad generalship. That is awful generalship, especially if you know that your side has no manpower reserves. He didn't care. He wasn't there most of the time. He was checked out most of the time. So you would go to talk to him, and he would be talking to angels. Literally, aides would go up to him at a tent on the eve of battle and say, "General, sir, pickets show that there's activity on our northern flank where we didn't expect the enemy to be." And he would be standing there staring at a corner up at the roof of the tent, talking to Angel Gabriel. And his lieutenants would just be standing there, well, I guess our brigade commanders will handle this. He's not going to do anything. That was half the time. So for every one little tactical thing that he might have done well before he got himself shot by his own men, and believe you me, don't you believe for a second that was an accident. For every one of those, there were 15 that you can easily read. If you look at the dispatches, you can easily read what a disaster this guy was, and yet he has a golden memory as some sort of brilliant Confederate warrior. Anyway, this one is a no. I haven't actually read Robert Louis Dabney's life of Stonewall Jackson. I don't think I would if I found it on the sidewalk. I've read many lives of Stonewall Jackson. You kind of have to. Stonewall in the Valley is a classic of military history. You can't not read it. And when he gets a brand new biography, he had one just a couple of years ago, it's behooved. It's incumbent on me to read it and review it. But that doesn't mean I have to go back and find all of these old paint jobs. so that one is a no. And in case you're keeping track at home, that means that there's only one no on this list. So Peg Kurkowski, Peg at the History Shelf, who has until now been an outcast far away on the northern side of the pig pens, thrown scraps and orange rinds once in a while by everybody else, but sneered at by everybody, Peg now has company. She now has another person who has only scored one on the whole list. It has Steve read it. And you know what that means? That means that astrophysicists at Caltech, laboring over their long-term Hubble telescope readouts, are saying to each other, I don't know, there's this strange sound almost. And their comrades are saying, oh yeah, that's just the background radiation of the universe. That was discovered a few decades ago. It's perfectly normal. And their comrades are saying, no, look at the figures. Yes, it's the background radiation of the universe, but it almost sounds like a woman's scornful laughter. And that's because the queen of the universe is still laughing. She has not been challenged. Hannah's books remain supreme. So the Has Steve Read It train barrels on. So we will do someone else tomorrow, and we will see if they can fare any better than Alan Braswell. We'll have to hope that this ignominious defeat does not drive him away from his new home at BookTube. Because this is all in fun, and these were great picks. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, and we will be back next time with another contender. We'll see if anybody can challenge the queen. Thank you, BookTube.